So today I want to go over my first iteration of a Wolf's Focus Companion Druid build for Season 7 of Diablo 4. Now this build is going to be a very early version and we're going to be using 0 uniques, but this will bring you into the end game. You'll be able to pretty easily get into Torment 1 and start to progress into Torment 2, 3, and 4, and it's actually really strong even with 0 uniques, and 0 uniques with a wolf focused companion druid is actually significantly weaker because for a lot of different elements for this type of build to work you usually need the unique pants, but we're not even going to be using those, and this build is still pretty strong this early. And keep in mind this build will change up a bit as we start to get all of our uniques and progress a bit more. So starting off, we're putting 1 point into Maul. We will be using this for a bit of spirit generation and to change us into Werebear and back out of Werebear. Upgrade 1, we have Enhanced Maul, so now Maul can fortify us. And then we're putting 1 point into Shred, primarily for movement, but also to spend our spirit. Upgrade 1, Shred now has increased attack speed and heals us. Upgrade 2, Shred now becomes a dash for all 3 parts of it for increased movement. Then we're going down 1 point into Blood Howl, which is just a heal. Upgrade 1 reduces its cooldown on kill by a second. And upgrade 2, the primary reason we're using it is to give us increased attack speed after we use it, which will be up a lot of the time. Then 1 point into Debilitating Roar, which just is a big damage reduction to all enemies around us. Upgrade 1 fortifies us. Upgrade 2 gives us increased damage while it's active, so just a big damage increase. Then we're going down 5 points into Wolves. Wolves are going to be our main damage dealer. Upgrade 1, they deal increased damage to CC'd enemies, and then upgrade 2, they can fortify us. We do also have the possibility of changing this to Brutal Wolf Pack, so when we crit, our wolves have increased attack speed, but for right now the fortify is better. We have 1 point into Poison Creeper. This is primarily because we get 3 Poison Creepers from this, which will help scale our damage. Then 1 into Ravens, same thing, we get a bunch of Ravens to scale our damage, but then we're also going upgrade 1. When something is hit by the Ravens, we have a higher chance to crit them, and then Brutal Ravens, so we summon 2 additional Ravens, which again will just scale our damage even more. Then we're going all the way down to Petrify, 5 points into this, because once we get 5 points into Petrify, once we cast it, it resets all of our non-ultimate cooldowns. So we cast this, resets everything, makes all enemies hit by this take a bunch of increased critical strike damage. And then upgrade 1, we just increase the critical strike damage enemies takes from this and increase the duration. Then upgrade 2, everything hit by Petrify reduces the cooldown. When we use it on a boss, it also reduces the cooldown. Then finally, we have our capstone, 1 with nature. Your companion skills each gain 1 additional companion for massive scaling and deal massively increased damage. You also gain the passive effect of all the companion skills, which will probably help later on in future builds. Then for our passives, we have 1 into Predatory Instinct to get 3 into Ironfur for damage reduction while in Werebear in 3 seconds after. So anytime we maul or use our Debilitating Roar, we get DR, then we transfer out and we still keep it for 3 seconds, so it'll be up a majority of the time. 3 into Backlash, deal increased damage after we use a defensive. We have 2, we'll constantly be using them. Then 3 into Touch of Fortitude, increase resistances, and Vigilance, we get damage reduction after using a defensive, which will be up majority of the time. Then going down 3 into Humanity, you deal increased damage while in human form. Now why this is so good is because when we cast a companion skill, specifically our wolf skill, we go into human form. So when we use wolves, we'll have a damage on top of that. And then 3 into Feral Aptitude, you deal increased damage while healthy and while above 100% movement speed, and these bonuses can stack, so just increased damage. 3 into Call the Wild, your companions just deal massively increased damage. Obviously that's incredibly good. 1 into Neurotoxin to get 3 into Envenom. You and your companions deal bonus critical strike damage against poison enemies. Everything will be poisoned all of the time as we get into some of our other effects. 3 into Defiance, nature skills do increase damage to elites. 3 into Defensive Posture, so increase the amount of fortify we get and gain damage reduction while fortified. Then 3 into Catastrophe, when we use our ultimate, we get increased damage for 8 seconds, which will be up a lot of the time. 3 into Quick Shift, shapeshifting into a new animal form gives you increased damage, stacking up and will be constantly shapeshifting back and forth. And then 3 into Heightened Senses, when shapeshifting, Werebear grants you damage reduction, Werewolf gains you movement speed, and both of these will persist as long as we're in any human form, so just DR and movement speed. And then we have our Paragon boards, and like I mentioned, this is pretty early, so this is going to heavily change as we get a lot more points, but I tried to do the best I could with how many points I have. And on the starter board, we're using Earth and Sky, which is a bonus to magic nodes within range, so some extra damage. And then the secondary nature skills, you'll increase damage to crowd controlled or vulnerable enemies. And then we're going up, and the board we're going to be taking is Untamed. Casting a companion skill grants you increased companion damage for 5 seconds, stacking up to 80%, so just massive damage increase for our companions. The glyph we're taking is Keeper, a bonus to rare nodes within range, so more companion damage and willpower. And then the secondary is you and your companions, you'll increase non-physical damage, so just more companion damage. Then we're going over the next board we're taking is Heightened Malice. While a poison enemy is nearby, you deal increased damage plus an additional increased damage for every poison enemy up to 4. So this actually got a buff in AoE situations and actually a buff in single target situations because this actually works against bosses, and everything around us will always be poison. And then the final glyph we're taking is Spirit for increased critical strike damage. The secondary is critical strikes increase the damage an enemy takes from you. That stacks up. And then obviously as we get more points and we get into future builds, this will be heavily changed and progress even further. And then we have our witch powers, which is also a work in progress because I don't have any of the lost powers and we will be using some of those. But first we're taking Vengeful Spirit Servant. Now this is a summon, so this should also scale some of our other damage and get a bunch of scaling from some of our different effects. But every certain amount of seconds, when it's currently 19 seconds, a Vengeful Spirit is summoned for 6 seconds. While active, any damage you take is redirected to the spirit. And then once you get it up to rank 5, when Vengeful Spirit's life is fully depleted, it rushes up to 8 enemies and deals a bunch of damage. So it's not really doing a ton until you get it ranked up, but it is a summon, so we'll get some additional scaling. Then we're using Poison Frog Servant. This will just run around and hit things, poisons them, and then once we upgrade it, it'll also taunt and pull enemies to it. And also when it dies, it blows up for a bunch of poison damage. And then we're using Hex of Flames, which a lucky hit a chance to inflict Hex of Flames on enemies. And when they're inflicted with Hex of Flames, when you damage them, you deal additional fire damage to them. And if it's a crit, that fire damage explodes in an area. I'm primarily just using this for some AoE right now. It will work a bit differently once we get a bit more into the build and specifically start to get some of our occult gems. Then we have Grow, probably the most important part of this build. This is the first thing you want to level up. So after casting an ultimate skill, your servants, minions, and companions are empowered, getting increased damage and growing really big. It's actually really cool with werewolves. But once you get this to rank 11, when this is procced, so the full 10 seconds, your companions now have a guaranteed crits. So this is absolutely massive. You cast your ultimate, get massive damage buffs for your companions and for yourself, and now your companions guarantee crits. So this is just massive burst damage. Then Aura of Siphoning, and Aura Siphoning surrounds you, dealing poison damage every second. This will also be poisoning everything. And once you get it to rank 10, every time it deals damage, it'll heal you. And then finally, we have Soul Harvest. Whenever you use a cooldown, you gain 1% primary core stat per surrounding enemy. This lasts for 9.5 seconds. When you get this upgraded enough, it'll be permanent when there are enemies around you. And this does stack up. So this will basically just be giving you massive core stat increases, which will help for one of our items as well. Now, I currently don't have my mercenaries leveled up too much. I'm currently using Subo because once I get him leveled up a little bit, we will be able to get the passive where once he uses cover fire on any enemy, they will take 25% increased critical strike damage from us for 4 seconds. And that's multiplicative, so it's a massive damage increase. That's the primary reason we'll be using him. And we currently don't have that yet, but you can also go use the Barbarian. She gives a bunch of attack speed increases, which will also be nice. Now for reinforcement, I generally recommend you just use her here. I currently don't have him progress much at all either, and I would generally recommend you keep switching them until you have all of your mercenaries heavily progressed for their bartering options. And then going into our spirit boons, we have wariness to take reduced damage from elites. We have sight talents for increased critical strike chance and increased lucky hit chance. We have avian wraith for increased critical strike damage. We have pack leader, which are lucky hit critical strikes have a 30% chance to reset your companion skills. This is the most important. And then we have calm before the storm, another lucky hit. Nature skills have a chance to reduce the cooldown of your ultimate. This will also play a much bigger role as we progress even more. And that finally brings us to our gear. And like I mentioned, I'm currently using no uniques, but if you do get an Erudite's Inexorable Will, this ring is generally pretty easy to get early on, and it's incredibly strong. I've actually been using this, but if you're looking for just full legendaries, that's what I'm going to be going over right now. Now, actually, one of the issues with this build with having all legendaries is we kind of run out of really good legendary powers or legendary aspects to put on them. So keep that in mind. As you start to get uniques, your power will massively increase. But starting out with our gems, on our weapon, I currently have some runes. I'm only using 2 runes right now because I don't have a really good combination of others, but I'm just currently using I cast Evade 2 times and I'll summon a Spirit Wolf Companion to attack enemies. This is actually the most important rune you can possibly get because all of these Wolf Companions are basically the same as your normal wolves. They get all the damage increases, they give you more damage increases, so that's going to be incredibly strong. For our other gems, we're just using willpower in all of our gear, and we're using some resistance gems in our jewelry to get max resistances, but obviously as you get higher torments, you'll need to get more armor and resistances. Then for our legendary aspects, on our two-handed weapon, we have companions deal an additional some amount of increased damage per companion you have. This is our biggest scaler. You want a two-handed weapon for this. On our necklace, your wolf companions are now werewolves, and they'll deal massively increased damage. They can't spread rabies, but that's really not that important. Then for all of our other legendary aspects, you have Moon Rage, so kills have a chance to summon a wolf companion for 35 seconds. This effect is just a lucky hit against bosses, and you get +3 to wolf, so just more possible wolf companions. We have Ravens now deal lightning damage, and that damage is increased. This is just another aspect because we don't have another super good one. Then on our gloves, we gain +1 additional companion, and your companions deal increased damage. This gives +1 to all companions, so that massively helps to scale our shepherds even more. Then on our helmets, we have when you use your shapeshifting skill that changes form, you heal a lot, and if your health is full, it gives you fortify, really good for defensives. Then on our chest piece, our companions now soak a certain amount of damage we would take, and they can't die anymore. And then on our legs, Shred gains a 4th dash attack that hits all surrounding enemies for more damage and knocks down enemies, so it's a pretty good stun. And then on our boots, when you evade, you turn into a cloud of bats. This makes you unstoppable. This is primarily why we're using this, but this increases the cooldown of our evade. So on your boots, you're going to want the attacks reduce evade's cooldown, so you can always have this up. And this is our main way of becoming unstoppable. And I will have the stats in the build planner, so you'll be able to go there and check all of the stats you're going to be wanting. But some of the most important ones, your tempering on your weapon, werewolf's attack speed increase, which will actually be on a lot of pieces, but change for werewolves to deal double damage is pretty massive. And something that's also really interesting, specifically with werewolf attack speed, is that in Diablo 4, most things will have a cap, so you have an attack speed cap, but werewolf attack speed is actually a different cap, which will also affect your wolves. So you can get werewolf attack speed and wolf's attack speed on different pieces of gear through your tempering that will have different stat caps, so you can get your wolves or your werewolf companions to have massively increased attack speed. And outside of that, all the stats will be on the build planner. But that's the entirety of this build. And again, this is just going to be a starter build, but it is pretty strong for how early on this build actually is. And as we get into uniques and further versions of the build, this build is going to be absolutely crazy for Torment 4 in the end game. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.